Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the opening of the 2021 Early Warning, Early Action Practitioners Workshop. We are incredibly excited for this virtual week. It's been a long time in the making. I wanted to pause, though, at the beginning of this for a moment, maybe to reflect a bit on what we're seeing around the world and why early warning, early action is as important as ever. Things like a wave of civil unrest in Colombia and the eruption of conflict in Israel-Palestine, a deepening climate crisis that's powerfully reshaping geographies, and a global pandemic that threatens to leave the most fragile countries behind. We started thinking about this meeting about 2 years ago, and we noticed that quite a few governments and multilaterals were developing their own early warning capacities, and that there was also a lot of support and investment in local and national capabilities on early warning, early action. But at the same time, there's been an acceleration in the volume and the speed of information available, as well as the proliferation of methods to detect patterns and to analyze all of this information. So we felt strongly that there was a need for a space in which people could just get to know the approaches that have been taking shape in different sectors, the government, private sector, multilateral, academia, with the aims of building on one another's insights on early warning rather than duplicating efforts. And also, importantly, on exchanging on models of early action. How do you operationalize action across a government or across an institution? So we've been really overwhelmed by the demand for participation and sharing in this event. We have 37 sessions organized over the coming 3 days with more than 100 speakers. And as of this morning, we have more than 800 people registered for this meeting. But I really want to make an appeal for this to be more than just a conference. And I know this is difficult when it's a virtual convening, but we have it as our goal to build the connective tissue in this space. So I have a request for each of you to meet and exchange contacts with at least 5 new people during your sessions this week. And as part of this overarching goal, I invite you, especially organizations from the Global South, to consider participating in an upcoming Data Discovery Day, which is something that we're co-hosting this summer with DataKind. And this is an incredible opportunity for organizations to build their use of data, to work with world-class experts to develop data-led projects, even using natural language processing, machine learning, and other approaches. There's going to be an information session with DataKind on day 3 of the meeting, so I invite you to look at the agenda for that. So I'm really delighted to welcome all of you to this unique event. I have to say, though, that none of this would have happened without one incredibly important person, and that's Branka Panic, who's our CIC non-resident fellow and who has led the design of this meeting. So a big thank you to Branka and to the rest of the team, including Robert Kang, our program assistant, as well as our communications manager, Symphony Chow. They really helped put this event together. And so now that I'm on the topic of saying thank you, there are 2 more people I'd like to thank. That's Wouter Jurgens and Dr. Abdullah Gay. These are our co-hosts for this meeting, who are also going to say a few words now. So please let me introduce to you Wouter Jurgens, who's the Deputy Director of the Security Policy Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. Wouter, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for this opportunity to be a part of the opening of this great conference. I'm really delighted to be able to join you here. I want to start actually by thanking the organizers and the participants for their energy and their presence and participation in these sessions. I've seen that that you've put together a very diverse program with a lot of interesting and actual topics. I've seen that there is a parallel programming, and that has advantages and disadvantages. An advantage is that there's a lot to choose for everybody, and a disadvantage is that that inevitably there will be sessions that you're unable to join. But I'm glad to see that sessions are recorded so that you can watch them back if you've missed something. because it will be difficult to choose if I look at the topics and the program. I want to thank you very much, in particular, Paige, but also Branka Panic, as you just mentioned, and Robert Kang for putting this all together. It's really tribute to you that we have this meeting. Maybe a few words about why we value this so much as the government of the Netherlands. We've really made early warning, early action a central part of our planning in the security policy process. It's already one of the pillars of our integrated international security strategy. And of course, we think this is important because we believe that prevention is key to all this, to prevent human suffering, to prevent conflict. And the way in which we are able to use and to leverage technology in order to do that is extremely important. And this is really early warning, early action agenda is really a way to do this. The Dutch policies for data for peace is actually, we do three things, three pillars. One is we build up our internal capacity in the ministry to really make early warning, early action an integral part of our policy making. Secondly, we fund several initiatives globally, and I believe a number of our partners are also part of this conference, including ACLED, projects at the UN, but also the PACT Ethiopia Conflict Early Warning and Rapid Response Pilot Program. These are just a few examples of the things that we are doing. And thirdly, and maybe most importantly, is to promote international cooperation in this field. And in this field in particular, is that it's really a multiplier if we work together on this. In putting together early warning analysis, but also the coordination of the early action. But also, and most certainly, in exchange of experience, creating best practices to come to this early warning methodology. And the funding of this workshop is for us a way to promote that and to do this further, to promote this exchange of ideas, to promote the exchange of best practices. This workshop week will be a follow-up in a way on earlier meetings in The Hague and in New York, and play an important role in bringing together practitioners from all different walks of life who are working on data for early warning and early action. And in this way, we can make good use, I hope, and also in this series of workshops, with all the experience that you've gathered around in the panels and in the participation of this conference, and to be inspired by each other. And I really welcome the suggestion that was made in the beginning to use this as an opportunity to meet new people. The suggestion was at least 5. Well, let's add another 5 and maybe even more. So I think we should be ambitious in this. And I wish I'm sure you will find it very fruitful in the coming days. Of course, this is virtual, but I'm sure we already gotten used to this kinds of getting together in the past year to make full use of this conference. And even if it's not in the same room or same location, we still are part of one community, I think. We very much welcome the enthusiasm that exists broadly around the world, but certainly in this group, about the opportunities that this methodology has, and in the increasing data that is available for peace and security. I also think it's good to look at issues like data quality and availability, reliability, and different kinds of techniques for analysis, data ethics, the challenges of artificial intelligence, and the discussions on how to translate the early warning in real early action to prevent conflict. Lastly, I think in the last few years we've made enormous steps in the field of early warning, early action, data innovation, both in my own foreign ministry, but also internationally. And in order to keep the pace in this, I think it's key to jointly think about next steps in international cooperation in this field, and to professionalize it further. Together with Germany and DPPA, the Netherlands organizes on Thursday a panel discussion that is part of this series to look more in depth into this issue, and we will have specific attention for a multi-partner trust fund to finance in a more structural way valuable data sources and research in this field. We look forward in meeting you all in this session, and most of all, I want to wish you inspiration and a very good and inspiring conference. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to you, Wouter, for those remarks, for the call to be inspired by one another, but also the future plans around that support to kind of the structure in the field with the multi-partner trust fund. I think that's a great idea. Now, with that, as I understand it, our representative from ECOWAS, Dr. Gay, is having trouble connecting, but happily we have with us for opening remarks Esther Daramola, who is coming from the Early Warning Directorate in ECOWAS. Esther, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paige. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me well. I bring you very warm greetings from ECOWAS, and I'd like to especially welcome the participants that have joined us from the ECOWAS region and indeed from our continent. We at the Commission are particularly happy to partner with the NYU Center for International Cooperation, co-host this very topical and important event. I say topical in the global sense, and specifically in the context of the ECOWAS region, where the peace and security situation, for instance in the Sahel, and the ensuing humanitarian crisis are a huge preoccupation for us presently. The need to enhance the global place and role for early warning and early response mechanisms couldn't be more pressing than now. The ECOWAS early warning system is part of the ECOWAS peace and security architecture and enjoys a robust mandate as articulated in the 1999 protocol. This mandate includes data collection, data analysis, as well as the generation of response-inducing reports for the policymakers of the ECOWAS Commission. We do this through the ECO1 system, a web-based field monitoring interactive analysis tool, customized especially for the ECOWAS region. The key component of that system is the network of field monitors in each and every member state, collecting early warning data on a daily basis and feeding that data into ECO1 to enable us to do real-time analysis in the integrated early warning and response situation room located at the Commission headquarters in Abuja. In a nutshell, the ECOWAS's approach to early warning and early response is a data-driven approach, focusing on human security with a deliberate emphasis on establishing operational linkages between practitioners of early warning and practitioners of early response at the regional level, at the national level, and eventually at the community level. We're also quite intentional in our consistent efforts to cross new frontiers, especially in the incorporation of technology such as GIS and the development of robust methodologies and frameworks. Recently, we developed an ECOWAS-specific human security analysis framework, and we're very proud of the work we're doing to ensure gender integration into the different phases of early warning and early response processes. Given the critical nature of early warning and early action in achieving sustainable human security, the ECOWAS Commission is delighted to be an active partner in this very important workshop. We look forward to exchanging with and learning from the many practitioners and participants attending the various sessions. Indeed, building partnerships and collaboration is key to strengthening early warning and response efforts, and we hope to continue forging strong partnerships even after this workshop. I'd like to end by thanking the NYU Center for International Cooperation for facilitating this workshop. We look forward to a very exciting week ahead, and hopefully post-pandemic, the opportunity will present itself for us to meet physically to deepen the conversations that we'll be having here today. Thank you all very much to all the participants that have joined us today, and I wish us all a very fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
No, my warm thanks to you, Esther, and also to Wouter. And on ECOWAS's approach, I do want to underline the uniqueness of this approach of having a kind of region-wide network of monitors, of people who are monitoring situation on the ground and feeding data into regional system, which is a very interesting approach. So let's then turn to our panel and let's get right into it. I'm very pleased to welcome 4 people today to have a kickoff discussion for this virtual week. And we will be joined by Esther Daramola from ECOWAS. We also have Rob Mugga from EWEA Institute and SecDev Group. We have Christina Goodness from the United Nations and Miranda Sissons from Facebook. And what I'd like to do is to enter into the discussion by just handing the floor over to each of them for 2 minutes for a kind of lightning discussion of why they feel early warning, early action is a really important issue right at this moment. So I would like to turn back to ECOWAS for that. So Esther, would you mind if you go first?
Sure. Thank you, Paige. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm actually representing the director of the ECOWAS Early Warning System, Abdulat, and I'm particularly pleased for the opportunity to share the exciting work that we're doing in the domain of early warning and early response in the ECOWAS region. Like I mentioned earlier, our system ECOWAS has been in existence for close to 2 decades. And in that time frame, of course, we have certainly made some important gains and acquired some very useful insight. But at the same time, we have encountered challenges, and all these have come together to give us a very unique perspective into early warning and early response. The context, the ongoing context of peace and security in the ECOWAS region underscores the pertinence for effective early warning and early response mechanisms. So the conversations we're going to have in the course of this week couldn't be more timely. The region is facing issues ranging from insurgencies to violent extremism, communal clashes, socio-political tension in some member states, election-related violence, and of course the COVID pandemic has also brought to the fore some important challenges, such as the growing prevalence of gender-based violence and the increasing number of palpable disenfranchised youths due to unemployment. So I think more than ever before, we are very cognizant of the fact that early warning and response structures must be part and parcel of the communities which they are intended to benefit. And to this end, the ECOWAS heads of state and government in 2014 established in each and every member state a national early warning and response mechanism through several normative and legal frameworks. To add to this, and more recently, the ECOWAS Commission is also looking to support the establishment of peace infrastructures in its member states with strong early warning and early response capacities. The objective of this, of course, is to have structural and long-term upstream conflict prevention measures founded on local capacities and ensuring the ownership within the respective countries and their communities. So we're very excited at the prospect of taking early warning and early response to where it's needed the most, and to look at sharing, and we look forward to sharing the details of that on Thursday during our pitch. Thank you.
No, thank you, Esther. So Esther underscoring particular challenges in her region, which of course are not unique to her region, but also I think the positive element of, again, the kind of leadership that ECOWAS shows in this domain, in this case, by establishing national centers for early response and developing peace infrastructure. So with that, now I'd like to turn the floor over to Robert Mugga from EWEA and SecDev Group for his opening remarks on why it's important now. Rob, over to you.
Thanks so much, Paige. It's great to be here, and thanks to you at CIC, ECOWAS, and of course the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands for organizing this event. And what a week you've got planned. By way of kind of really quick background, I'm an amateur early warning enthusiast. I'm no professional, but I have conducted some evaluations on early warning for international and intergovernmental organizations, as well as social media companies. I've spent a couple of years now working on building early warning systems, including using remote sensing tools and automated data fusion and predictive analytics to structure data. And I've been heavily involved more recently in developing crime prediction systems, including sort of more high resolution spatial tools to track homicide, assault, and property crimes at sort of a granular scale. And this has taken me very deep into the discussions around algorithmic bias and thinking about ways to reduce unintentional harms generated from some of these tools that we're using. And I'm also, I've worked with pretty much almost all of the groups that are assembled for this extravaganza that you've organized. So it's really exciting to see it. And I think that's a testament to, and I'm sure others will say the same thing, the ways in which we're cross-pollinating ideas and sharing experiences. And I think it's a really rich moment to be in this field. And I'm seeing that cross-pollination not happening just in New York or in Oslo or in The Hague or in London, but I'm seeing it happening in Abuja and Rio, where I typically live, and all across Asia and elsewhere. I think that we are on this cusp of a revolution, I think, in early warning capabilities. And perhaps we've been saying that for a couple of years now. But as you mentioned, Paige, I think this combination of massive data availability, increased processing and computational power, and new methods is game-changing. And we're seeing that. And I don't need to go through all the numbers, but we're able to do sort of more complex modeling and simulations in ways that we never really imagined possible. And I think we're seeing, as I already mentioned, this growing early warning ecosystem, including government, intergovernment, non-government, but also private business and other actors who are playing a really important role. So there's huge expertise that's brought to bear. But I think there are three challenges that I just want to highlight in my short intervention that I think we need to overcome to move the dial. And the first is that I think we have to, and we are moving, we have to continue moving from more top-down and centralized early warning systems to more distributed and empowering early warning environments. Second, I think we need to develop greater capacities to apply more strategic and scientific thinking in our early warning design and communication, rather than focusing narrowly only on the tactics and the tools. And third, I think we have to improve the incentives for early warning action, as well as deterrence for early warning inaction, especially in sort of more risk-adverse environments. And that's tough. So, I think we all know the history of early warning begins in the 1970s, really, as a way of trying to avoid mass atrocities, conflict, and war. We all know that most early warning systems have a monitoring and communication and a response function. And I think what's interesting has been the shift over the last couple of decades towards more top-down, sort of highly quantitative and very decision-maker oriented or Superman oriented tools towards more decentralized and more community-based and more sprinkler system type approaches. And I think these two analogies of the Superman and the sprinkler have been used. I'm certainly not the one who came up with it, but I think it's a useful way of thinking about early warning. And we're seeing more and more layering of data offering higher and higher levels of resolution and granularity. And we're seeing also the adoption of more open source and sensor-based data and geospatial analytics together with image and language processing and machine learning tools. But I think the common criticism that we're going to talk about over the next hour or so is the common refrain in the field is that despite all of these fancy tools and alert systems, regardless of their accuracy, validity, and timeliness, they rarely precipitate sufficient or even appropriate action. So in other words, they tell decision makers what to do, but they don't tell decision makers what to do, but rather what is likely to happen if they do nothing. And I think one of the key lessons is that we need to focus not just on shaping decision maker understanding, but also empowering local communities where early warning action is needed most. And I think this idea of peace architectures or architectures of peace is a great start. Another one of the recurring challenges in the early warning field is deciding what metrics to monitor and how to measure the attribution. Many of us are inundated with data and really excited by it, but we forget to check if we're in fact tracking the right metrics. So it's important to recall that access to structured and unstructured data and knowing how to extract meaning are two different things. So developing this capability for strategic thinking on early warning across organizations is key, and it requires time, investment, and training. And I think we can help advance this kind of thinking by developing greater understanding of shared problems across organizations at different levels, and by deepening, as was already mentioned by Esther, local level analytical capabilities closer to the ground where the action is. So let me just simply conclude by stating, I think early warning is more needed than ever. And as you, Paige, I think mentioned, it's incredibly important given that our global and our subnational, the global to the local environments are becoming more complex. It's this convergence of multiple trends, I think, that's generating cascading and compounding risks. And being able to track this combination of geopolitical tensions, runaway climate change, digital harms, health-related emergencies are exceeding our human capabilities to anticipate the onset, duration, and end of conflict. And so I think at a minimum, though, to deal with this, we got to get towards more distributed and empowering early warning environments. We've got to create greater strategic thinking. And I think we have to invest in more robust incentives for action. So back to you.
Many thanks, Rob. That's a wonderful overview. And the set of challenges that you described, I think, are really good ones for all of us to be thinking about over the course of this week. So we don't get kind of lost in the minutia, but are pulled out to really what we're trying to achieve. I like this idea of having more distributive approaches to this. So with that, I want to go to Christina Goodness at the UN. She's in the Department of Peace Operations, Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. And she is the lead in the peace and security architecture of implementing the Secretary General's data strategy. So Christina, very, very much looking forward to your thoughts.
Okay, great. I hope everybody can hear me. Just give me the signal, the hand signal, or otherwise, if not. So thank you so much. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to CIC and our host from the Netherlands and ECOWAS, but CIC in particular has supported this conversation now for a couple of years on innovative uses of tools and data to support peace and peace operations. And I think that's commendable, and we're very grateful, I think, to have this regular mechanism to widen up the conversation. As you know, the UN can be a notoriously hermetic environment, to say the least. So very grateful. Maybe just a couple of remarks, because I think Robert's opening kind of chapeau really set a high bar there. But I guess from my perspective, my background, I think I can speak a little bit more to some of the technical aspects, and in particular, crisis response, which is where I'm coming from exactly at this moment, having served for the past now year on what seems to be like the longest crisis that we've ever dealt with, from a formal crisis perspective in the UN, which is the global COVID pandemic response. But maybe just switching a bit, because you mentioned that the UN has a data strategy, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it if you haven't, at un.org/data strategy, or just Google it, because for the first time we have an engineer secretary general. And yes, he was also previously the head of the Socialist Party, but he thinks like an engineer. And I think those of us in particular that have an interest in sort of tightening up the mechanics of the organization, adapting it to the reality that we have right now, are really jumping on this moment with a champion that is pushing internally quite hard, which is some of the hardest bits, right? It's not really our interactions with member states or civil society, even though we're horribly troubled in that way. It's really internally shaping up the shop. And I guess what I would point out is that I'll mention a couple of different specific purposes for early warning that we're already getting started. We've gotten started on, and now we're almost at a second or 1.5 generation on. But a lot of our work right now is really focused on what you might call cleaning up the shop, which is acknowledging that the UN, and in particular the peace and security pillar, where I am from, the oldest of the old school part of the organization, it was never set up to be a data-oriented organization. Diplomacy did not have that as a fundamental premise, to be data-driven at all. So we were lacking some of maybe the fundamentals that other organizations, or even other parts of the UN, like the humanitarian sector, which is much more straightforward retail model, if you think about it, right? We just didn't have some of these things, fundamental policies on privacy, or tools that were easily available. So a lot of the work right now is just recognizing that, in order then for us to better take advantage of the massive knowledge bases that are internal in the organization, and of course the global human network that we have to collect data on any given thing and inform in an insightful way to the strategic decision makers, both in the organization and our partners in member states and civil society, with early warning. So a lot of the focus is kind of cleaning up the shop. But I would say that this extended pandemic environment, pandemic crisis, really has brought out, like Robert was saying, the real interdependence of the factors that we would be tracking in an early warning model, right? Or many different models. And those include, of course, all of those factors that transcend national boundaries, the pandemic being one, but economics and environmental factors, financial factors, and the rise of fintech, and of course, natural disasters. But all of these factors are built into models that we might use for what's called the executive committee in the UN, which is the heads of all the agencies, funds, and programs in the major parts of the Secretariat, who regularly convene and discuss regional issues or national issues or global issues. And the models are getting a little bit more complex, and I think there's a little bit more flexibility. I'll mention a couple specific ones in viewing the way that we are even modeling early warning factors or dynamics and tracking them, and not just creating and throwing all of our eggs into one basket and saying it's all on this model and it either works or it doesn't work. In fact, we're developing a more flexible approach. So maybe just to get very specific, there are a couple of projects that I would bring to participants' attention. On Thursday, we are going to be showing, other colleagues from the UN Crisis Center are going to show an early warning model that they've created in Mali to understand how, in fact, well, we are standing up to the mandate to protect civilians. And what it means to use real-time data in a very disparate and challenging environment such as Mali. But if I was to guess that there were some big buckets that increased attention to structured data collection that is understood to have an accountability really clearly behind it, and using it to scan in an environment, create a model, integrate sense data, and then engage with decision makers. That's essentially the 4-part model there. Those 3 big buckets that we would be further developing on the tools are on forecasting of violence and atrocities. So that's one bucket of projects, forecasting violence against individuals, groups, and targeted vulnerable communities. The second one would be use of early warning actually to calibrate our mandates, right? So if we are in, let's take the Middle East right now, and there are several missions there, peacekeeping missions, and political offices, are there ways that we can calibrate our mandates in order to be more successful or to be more transparent or to be more realistic on the ground, taking into account the evolving factors? And so that's the second bucket, is how can we use early warning for mandate? And the third, almost done, is scenario-based planning and evolving different scenarios. So I'll leave it there and back over to Paige, and grateful again for the opportunity to exchange.
Thanks, Christina. And I want to encourage everybody to look at those sessions that she mentioned. I really enjoyed, Christina, the point that you were making about how diplomacy was not set up to be data-driven. And that means now that what you have to do is to re-architecture, in many ways, the organization in order to be able to provide a different approach. So that for me is a very profound challenge that you've highlighted. So with that, maybe moving on to another set of profound challenges, I'm delighted to have Miranda Sissons from Facebook here to talk about Facebook's approach. So Miranda, for you, why is this a really important issue right at this moment?
Thank you, Paige, and thank you to everyone who is here and sharing so generously and organizing this. This is really important for human rights and for humanity around the globe, right? And we stand at the brink of these amazing opportunities to learn more, be more, do more in a very incoherent and deeply troubled environment. And I'm here particularly today because I participated in the workshop 2 years ago before I came to Facebook. In my role as Director of Human Rights, which is a policy role to try to ensure that the company exerts understanding and leadership to fulfill its UN guiding principles on business and human rights expectations to respect human rights. And I was very excited in that interview process that there appeared to be some early warning work going on, which we talk about as work on understanding societal violence and conflict, and involves a multidisciplinary team across engineering, operations, and policy, where we have a formalized process of detecting and prioritizing countries or contexts at the highest risk of, I think, what experts here would call communal violence, and trying to then prioritize investments in natural language processing, in our products, in our operations, in our language coverage, in order to mitigate or prevent the misuse of our products in that environment. And that scales to, and it is quite closely tied with UN Guiding Principles guidance that we need to prioritize human rights risks based on scope, severity, and remediability. And we need to prevent or mitigate those risks. And the good thing about doing this as an engineering environment is, of course, that you have a lot of engineers and data scientists, right? So we work with around about, I believe, we work with scores and scores of data sets and run a very data-driven process where we primarily, and I want to emphasize this, there isn't a magic source that we somehow produce from inside Facebook, but we are using the conflict-related data sets that so many of you use, right? Leavened perhaps with a bit more technical expertise, sometimes leavened with cross-platform or on-platform signals. But we then use that to drive decision points, right? What are the investments we can make to try and mitigate or prevent what appear to be the biggest risk of harm around the use of our products or the misuse of our products? And we've used that process, for example, language is extremely important in media. And of course, the relationship between speech and action is very unclear, I think, to everyone. But for example, in order to be able to have operational staff that can handle the languages in a conflict that is in a context that's very, very likely to spill into conflict, we need months to bring some of that specialized expertise on board. We may need half a year or a year to build out the national language processing that allows us to detect and build detection for violence and bullying and harassment, violence and incitement, or policy violating hate speech. And we don't just try and detect this, we also try then, in line with other human rights obligations, in situations of greatest risk, to downrank or make less visible the distribution of such speech even before it can go to content moderators. And we, of course, try and build for situations in where there is low penetration of the platform. So we're trying to look at real risk to people, not just places in which Facebook has the highest penetration. And what I would say there, because I know I'm at time, is the work stream that I've been involved in the last 2 years, I think shares, in all humility, many of the problems that everybody else here has discussed, but that we are tremendously fortunate to be able to approach this in a more narrowly scoped way. We're in an engineering environment. We can be very clear about our goals and our non-goals, and our decision-making processes in an agile software environment run, daily, weekly, quarterly, so that we can run fairly swift cycles to detect mitigations and to try and put them into engineering practice. So we do have a session on CrowdTackle, which is one kind of visibility tool that's very useful. Later this week, and we will be running an off-the-record session about our early warning and societal violence prioritization process. But it has been both a privilege and relief to see this at work in an engineering context and to see people pushing this work to unlock practical decisions in policy, in operations, and in product. And I'll stop there.
Oh, thanks to you, Miranda. And I also want to suggest that everyone look at those Facebook sessions, but also outside of that, Miranda's been leading on developing a human rights policy for Facebook along the lines that she just described. How is it that the company can prioritize human rights harms or the potential for human rights harms and then reorient investment internally to try to prevent that? So I think that's worth taking an extra look. I hope that the chat is open online, and we do invite questions, but I'm actually going to send a round of questions to this group myself. And I think we've already been touching on some of the kind of very exciting technical innovations that are driving the field forward. I think one of the sticky issues that almost everybody has touched on is the issue of early action and inaction. And so maybe we can start with that. And I would like to go to Esther first, because there's been some very serious thinking within ECOWAS about early action and how to structure that within the region. But, Esther, can you tell us, what for you can be done to really drive forward implementation of an active approach, or rather than what we've seen in so many cases, which is that we know that the risk is there, but nothing happens? What has ECOWAS's approach been?
Thank you very much, Paige. I think bridging the gap between early warning and early response, like you rightfully said, Paige, has been at the forefront of our work in the past couple of years. There was an evaluation of the early warning system, and the very first thing that was said to us by the people that did this work was, hey, you have developed a very robust system, but there's no corresponding response in the region. So this is something that was highlighted to us and something that became a priority for us. I think across the globe, not just in the region, but across the world, a lot of attention and resources have been accorded to interventions that tackle the impacts of insecurity, and less so on interventions that focus on the root causes of insecurity. And I think it's evident that security-based responses alone are completely inadequate to address the underlying economic, cultural, and social drivers of most of the conflicts that we face in the region. And with the increased sophistication and even with the increased availability of early warning alerts, there doesn't seem to, and I think Robert alluded to this, that there isn't an apparent proportionate response or early action. So back to your question, Paige, to address this gap, ECOWAS is in the process of decentralizing its early warning and response mechanism. This is an initiative that we are extremely excited about. And the essence of this is to boost the capacity at the national level of the response structures within our member states to respond to low intensity conflicts. The thinking behind this is if the communities and the national structures are able to respond to the early warning alerts, there will be less a need for it to escalate to a regional response. The early warning and response mechanisms in the member states have a very, very strong mandate. And that mandate is and that's very important. We thought it was very important to have the political buy-in for them to be able to be effective. And that mandate is to activate and coordinate response to early warning alerts. It's still at the very nascent stages, so we're keeping our fingers crossed. And we're very expectant that this initiative will go a long way towards bridging the gap between early warning and early response. And of course, I think I made mention of the project we're working on, which is to support member states in the establishment of peace infrastructures. The thinking behind this is early warning and early response should reside at the communities that are most affected by these issues. And the actors in these communities have a better understanding, better grasp of the issues. So it's more effective to actually have this early warning mechanisms at the community level. So in the process of trying to figure out how best to do that, we have some good examples. Ghana has a national peace infrastructure that seems to be our reference. So we are right, as I'm talking to you, in the process of trying to evaluate, look at the member states, look at the structures that exist, because we have a lot of traditional religious structures that are not institutionalized, that are not structured, but that do serve within the communities to play this role. So we wanted to look at them, understand them, and support member states to render them be more effective in community level early response and early action. And I know you're about to wait to stop me now, Paige, so I'll leave it at that.
No, thank you, Esther. And I want to come to Christina next on this issue. So ECOWAS, which is also a multilateral organization, is now kind of going through a process of decentralizing its approach. And of course, I know the UN, there are lots of different approaches going on within the system. But what is your take on the challenges for early action and some of the changes that you'd like to see for that to be more effective?
Yeah, I think I can speak more on the part of very specifically the peace and security pillar in the UN, right? Which is more of a command and control culture, having a heavy uniformed component to it, and honestly being male dominated and having a kind of a militaristic aspect of the culture, which is fairly straightforward. I mean, it's not veiled or anything. So part of the challenges is just really recognizing that and understanding that just presents specific challenges in cultural change in order to embrace data-driven approaches if they sort of challenge the status quo in a certain way, right? So there's an internal aspect to it, and externally, I think there's parts of the challenge actually have to do with the way that we present to member states and we engage in the dialogue with member states in the context of, the C34, these special committees, in which we reveal in a much more close contact way how we anticipated, the data. In fact, data-driven storytelling is not a new thing in the UN. It's really an old art, and it is just not driven by coherent and well-structured data that is coherent throughout the decades in which that data storing has undertaken. But it has to do with a little bit of the tone and the change that in the way that we discuss with member states how we anticipated disaster or crisis of a certain nature, and then how we present that evidence. I think in many ways that's sort of the core of what needs to change. Of course, everything that I mentioned before, which is really the technical, the plumbing, so to speak, that it creates a condition in which data can flow well and then inform other arguments. I'm recalling this project, I think another NYU project, I think it's called the 100 Questions bit from GovLab. And it just describes all of the kinds of questions an organization has to ask itself in order to get to more advanced analytical models, in order to use AI well for early warning, as an example. And I think we're kind of going through those questions from a technical point of view, but I would point out that some of the organizational change aspects are not insignificant, and at the most senior levels, because right, the reality is we have a lot of political appointees that come from very varied backgrounds, and some have a good management background, some are more political, etc. So the cultural change aspect, I think, is very significant for us. I don't know if that answered you.
No, yeah. I think that's great. Multilateral organizations present certain challenges. I think also because these are highly politically sensitive issues for member states, right? And I think ECOWAS has been actually very good at setting the stage and kind of doing early warning in a way that is that recognizes those sensitivities. Miranda, I wanted to just ask you very quickly, maybe in 30 seconds or a minute, because it's quite different working within a corporation setting in terms of the sensitivities around action. Is it easier to do early action because of the kind of corporate structure rather than managing all these different external relationships? Or is it still very challenging?
I think it's helped by the fact that we have a fairly narrow use case, which is we're doing this in order to make platform investments to prevent or mitigate, right? And that narrow frame is very useful because then you can use data to indicate the most impactful investments and brief decision makers that way, and that makes it far easier for them. So I would say not necessarily in any corporate environment. There's always stakeholders. There's always an ongoing struggle between severity and size. Is severe abuse where in a place where we have very little ability to prevent misuse, or where there's just no misuse, it's just a terrible situation. Comes across and becomes involved in a bigger framework, that's difficult. But I would say yes, I think potentially, given the escalation, particularly the Silicon Valley software agile software development environment of escalation, de-escalation, alignment, quarterly planning, and quarterly investments in very, very robust frameworks for product development, I think that's very helpful for us, but we also have an easier job to do in some ways.
Thanks, Miranda. So Rob, I want to come to you next, and I want to zoom out a little bit in this last 10 minutes that we have together and talk about the future of early warning, early action, what you see as maybe some of the major challenges on the horizon, and touching across different issues, whether it's technology, whether it's transformation of violence, but also a lot of the ethical concerns that have arisen around things that you've mentioned in your remarks, like algorithmic bias. Can you just frame for us a little bit, what do you see as some of the challenges on the horizon for the future?
Wow. There are many challenges on the horizon as we look forward. I think we have this very complicated geopolitical environment, which is going to generate both the return, the resumption of interstate, I think, tensions, all sorts of asymmetric natures of these conflicts being manifest, but also, I think, rising forms of sort of in-between forms of conflict, somewhere between outright situations of violence or chronic violence and outright conflict. So I think that we have a very complex environment with also diminishing cooperation, or at least a stalling cooperation to address some of these challenges, so deep political challenges. But I think added to that, we have really complex dynamics around climate change with respect to both short and long-term stressors, which have a complicated relationship with social unrest and violence. Of course, it's not direct and linear, but I think this is an issue that I'm sure Esther and ECOWAS are very seized of right now, as is, of course, the UN. But then, in addition to that, we have the work that the kinds of environments that Miranda's alluding to around misinformation, disinformation, the spread of hate speech, a whole array of digital harms, which I think, and cross-platform dynamics and amplified dynamics, and all of those address, trespassing into issues of free speech and privacy and data protection. And then, of course, health crises and other forms of dynamics that we've just witnessed in the last year and a half. And I think it's a combination of these which are generating, I think, real concerns at multiple levels and across multiple verticals. And I think this event is a response to that. I think that there's also, of course, enormous advantages that we're seeing in terms of the rise of cloud computing, machine learning, geospatial tools, which is transforming the power of potential predictive analytics and forecasting. The ability to simulate, as the European Union is doing, the entire Earth, using petabytes of data and be able to run models and really quite high resolution models using supercomputers and other technologies, I think is going to be game changing. And of course, there's a hugely diverse, and it's on this call, it's represented, set of capabilities around being able to mobilize those. So, in 2 minutes, that to me is the environment we're facing. In terms of what we're going to see in the future, I think we're going to see a continuation and a deepening of the kind of incident monitoring that we've seen led by groups like ACLED and Sentinel and others at greater and higher resolutions. And those are going to continue to be dependent, I think, primarily on secondary sources. We're going to see, I think, a real step change in user-generated and crowdsourced inputs as using both ambient and direct data, but combining audio, visual, sensor, sonar, together to provide us, I think, really dynamic understandings in multiple dimensions of challenges, both in the present, but also into the immediate future and into long-range thinking. I think we're going to see more and more tools assisting executive decision-making using automated data fusion and really more simplified heuristics, because I think one of the big challenges for executives is really trying to interpret what's happening. And so the UX side of things, I think, is going to be a huge evolution, and a lot of younger and newer groups, and I see Miranda enjoying it, in addition to the existing traditional tech platforms, are going to be investing in this. I also hope to see a greater investment in measuring and evaluating outcomes of a lot of our work. I feel sometimes, and I work with Facebook and YouTube and others, and I feel sometimes we're throwing sort of darts into an empty room, hoping that what we do, whether it's redirect or whether it's change content or whether it's, introduce campaigns, we often don't know the outcomes of what we're doing. I mean, we think that there's a high attribution, but, applying scientific measures and maybe RCTs might be the next generation. One final comment is just on ethics. I think this is of course a major preoccupation and justifiably so, about not just the ways in which data is infringing on people's data collection, potentially infringes on people's rights, but also the challenges and biases that are introduced through the kind of automated mechanisms we're applying. And I think there's a couple of strategies that we're already seeing emerging to address some of these issues. And one of them is more algorithmic transparency. So being more open and transparent and clear about what actually is in the formulas and the mathematics that we're doing, and communicating that in a clear way. Not all of us, 1% of us will understand, maybe less than 1% will understand what the actual formula means. But in explaining more transparently, how do we generate these predictions and findings, I think, is critical. Explaining methods, using this as a learning opportunity, and that will build trust, it'll build brand, it'll do all those great things that companies and governments would like to do. But I think it's going to be incumbent on us as early warning specialists to become better at explaining exactly how we're rendering these methods. And I cannot tell you, in my review of dozens and dozens of early warning systems, how few are open and clear about exactly what alchemy they're applying. The second, I think, is testing for fairness and discrimination in a lot of the predictive analytics that we're developing. And developing independent tests to see how protected classes are being affected, either in an intended fashion or an unintended fashion. And I think we're seeing a lot of tech companies exploring this in really important ways, but I think we should be public about that. The third is working with rights groups, and it's wonderful to see Miranda, who comes from that world, working directly inside the belly of Facebook and bringing those opinions and ideas straight to the top. And then creating codes of conduct, and drawing on the expertise, the extraordinary expertise of human rights activists and specialists, to build stronger ethical standards within our own community, our own epistemic community. Anyways, I'll stop there. Over to you, Paige. Sorry.
No, thanks, Robin. I saw Miranda waving, so I do want to go to her for 1 minute. We only have 4 minutes left, so I'd like to do is have Miranda, Christina, and then Esther speak each for 1 minute. I'm sorry to have to limit it in that way, but Miranda, first to you.
I was excited, Robert, because of course I agree. The complexity of what we can do far outstrips the capacity of human brains, and particularly stress decision-making brains, to absorb and understand. And I think both the way we frame our understanding of how people absorb this information, and particularly our understanding of users' UX design, and we are standing at a wonderful cusp of possibility there. And I do think that that's one thing that I'm very fortunate in my environment, but I think everybody can, there's so much possibility in that regard.
Great, Christina.
Yeah, so the future of early warning. Well, again, I guess in 1 minute, I guess I would turn back to those 3 categories that I'd mentioned before, atrocity forecasting or violence forecasting. For us, mandate calibration, or to simplify it, knowing what we're doing. And then the third one is scenario-based planning, so that the data helps to inform scenarios that allow us to understand different ways that we could go about things based on past data and based on potential early warning signals. There's like 3 big buckets. But maybe 2 other super quick things is really the democratization of the tools. We're seeing that very directly in the UN, where we have citizen development initiative, where in fact data collection is really being democratized and not so much command and control. And then like as was mentioned, a refinement of the approaches for decision making for those most senior positions that are taking very consequential decisions based on early warning, a refinement of those. Over.
Thank you, Christina. And Esther, 1 minute for you.
Okay, Paige, thank you very much. I think for us at ECOWAS, I think I've learned a lot from these conversations today. And when we talk about data and incorporation of technology into early warning and early action, this is something that we know that we have a lot to learn about, and it's something that is of utmost importance to us. For ECOWAS, we have made some baby steps, I like to call them, in the incorporation of GIS into ECO1. And this has been transformative and has enabled us to, we're trying to incorporate tools that are pragmatic into our context, and that we have the capability to use and to use well. So we have, for us, the future of early warning would entail incorporating technology into our system, enhancing our use of GIS. Presently, it's had a wow. The incorporation of GIS into ECO1 has had a wow factor. It has enabled us to, particularly on cross-border issues, look at where to be able to highlight the hotspots and the risk of contagion. So we're looking really to enhance our use of GIS in ECO1, and we're also looking to enhance the use of ECO1 data. We've trained data for, like I said, close to 17 years now. And we know that there are tools and technology and software out there that would enable us to make better use of that data. So we want to remain at the cutting edge of technology on enhancing our data. So for us, really, it would be, I see the wave. So in a nutshell, it would be really to enhance, to incorporate technology to enhance our data. Thank you.
No, thanks to all of you. So in short, this is a huge space of possibility, but a space that requires care and humans at the center of it. Thank you so much to this panel, to Miranda Sissons, Rob Mugga, Esther Daramola, and Christina Goodness. Thank you to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and for ECOWAS for co-hosting this meeting. Now all of you can go forth. We have the pitches, we have panels, and we have hands-on workshops where hopefully those of you can learn something, a new skill. We're really looking forward to this week, and thank all of you for participating. Thanks.